The heat on the 405 was not just a temperature, it was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of smog and exhaust that pressed down on the roof of the black Chevy Tahoe like the thumb of an angry god. It was 5 o'clock in Los Angeles, the golden hour turning into a bronze haze as the sun dipped toward the Pacific, blinded by a layer of pollution that made the sky look like a bruised peach. Behdala drummed his fingers on the leather steering wheel, the rhythm out of sync with the aggressive talk radio host ranting about the decay of the American dream through the speakers. He didn't know how literal that statement was about to become. The air conditioning was blasting, fighting a losing war against the California summer, but a bead of sweat still traced a jagged path down his temple, getting caught in the grit of a 3-day stubble. He adjusted the tactical sunglasses on his nose, staring at the sea of red brake lights, stretching infinitely northward, a river of stalled steel and frustration. This was the pulse of the city, stalled, angry, and unaware. To his left, a rusted sedan with a "baby on board" sticker idled. To his right, a gleaming white Tesla with a driver too engrossed in a smartphone to notice the world ending. The smell of burning asphalt and cheap gasoline filtered through the vents, a sensory prelude to the carnage waiting in the wings. Behdala checked the glove box reflexively, his hand brushing the cold polymer of his sidearm, a customized Glock 19 with a mounted light. It was a habit born of paranoia, or perhaps intuition. The traffic had been stopped for 20 minutes, longer than the usual rush-hour misery. Then the sound changed. It started low, a subsonic vibration that rattled the coins in the cup holder, before erupting into the distinctive, terrified scream of a siren. Not one, but a dozen. CHP cruisers tore down the emergency shoulder, their lights painting the concrete barriers in strobing washes of red and blue. But they weren't chasing a speeder, they were fleeing. The radio host cut out, replaced by the harsh, digitized screech of the emergency alert system. The sound was a jagged knife in the cabin's silence. "Civil danger warning," the robotic voice intoned, lacking all humanity. "Residents of Los Angeles County are advised to shelter in place. Reports of widespread violent aggression. Do not approach infected individuals." Behdala killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with a violence that hadn't yet reached him. Then he saw it. 300 yards up the freeway, chaos bloomed like a dark flower. A tanker truck jackknifed, screeching across 4 lanes, crushing a Prius against the center divide. The explosion was instantaneous, a rolling ball of orange napalm that licked the sky and sent a shockwave rattling through the chassis of the Tahoe. But it wasn't the fire that froze the blood in Behdala's veins. It was the people. They were pouring out of the cars ahead, not running away from the fire, but toward each other. Through the heat shimmer and the rising black smoke, he saw a man in a business suit tackle a woman to the asphalt. It looked like a brawl, a road rage incident gone terminal, until the man tore a chunk of flesh from her neck with the savagery of a rabid coyote. The spray of crimson was visible even from this distance, a dark mist atomizing in the sunset. "Jesus Christ," Behdala whispered, the American slang falling flat against the horror. He didn't hesitate. The prepper instinct, honed by years of reading forums and stockpiling MREs in his garage in Reseda, kicked into overdrive. He popped the door, the rush of outside noise hitting him like a physical blow. Screams, car horns, the crackle of fire, and the wet, guttural roaring of things that used to be human. He grabbed his go-bag from the passenger seat, the heavy canvas reassuring in his grip, and stepped out onto the freeway. The heat was immediate, baking the asphalt.
People were abandoning their vehicles now, a stampede of panic. A mother clutched her child, weaving through the gridlock. A man in a Dodgers jersey stood atop his hood, screaming at the sky. Behdala scanned the perimeter, his eyes narrowing. The threat wasn't just ahead, it was climbing the embankment. From the homeless encampments under the overpass, figures emerged. They moved with a jerky, broken gait, their clothes hanging in tatters, skin gray and sloughing off in the heat. Their eyes were gone, replaced by voids of milky white or hemorrhaged red. One of them, a creature that might have once been a teenager, lunged at a frantic driver trying to change a tire. The sound of the bite was wet and loud, a sickening crunch of cartilage. The driver screamed, a high-pitched wail that was cut short as two more of the infected swarmed him, tearing at his limbs with unnatural strength. Behdala drew his weapon. The weight of the gun was the only anchor in a world that had suddenly lost its gravity. He clicked the safety off. "Move!" he roared at a stunned family standing frozen by their minivan. "Get off the highway, now!" His voice was command-strip rough, cutting through the din. They blinked at him, uncomprehending, until a blood-slicked figure vaulted over the hood of a Ford F-150 and landed amidst them. Behdala raised the weapon, the sights aligning with a practiced ease. He squeezed the trigger. The gunshot was a thunderclap, deafening in the open air. The round caught the attacker in the shoulder, spinning it around, but it didn't drop. It hissed, a sound like escaping steam, and turned toward him. Half its face was missing, revealing the anatomy of the skull beneath, yet it showed no pain, only a hunger so profound it felt like a vacuum. Headshots, Behdala muttered to himself, a grim remembrance of 1,000 zombie movies that were suddenly documentaries. He adjusted his aim.
The second shot took the creature in the ocular cavity, snapping its head back and dropping it instantly to the tarmac. The family screamed and ran, scrambling up the ivy-covered slope toward the residential streets of Brentwood. Behdala didn't watch them go. The highway was becoming a kill box. The fire from the tanker was spreading, igniting fuel leaks in the stalled cars. Black smoke billowed up, blotting out the sun, turning the Los Angeles twilight into a choking, hellish night. He vaulted the center divider, his tactical boots finding purchase on the concrete. He needed high ground. He needed to see the scale of it. He sprinted across the empty southbound lanes, which were blocked by a pileup of police cruisers that had tried to form a barricade and failed. The scene inside the blockade was an abattoir, officers down, their uniforms soaked in dark fluid, while the things they had sworn to protect feasted on them. Behdala kept moving, his breath ragged, the adrenaline pumping a toxic cocktail through his system. He scrambled up the embankment, tearing his pants on a chain-link fence, and crested the hill. He looked out over the Los Angeles basin and his heart stopped. It wasn't just the freeway, it was everywhere. Columns of smoke rose from downtown, from Santa Monica, from the valley. The iconic grid of lights was flickering out, block by block, replaced by the orange glow of 1,000 fires, and there, in the distance, the Hollywood Hills were burning. The famous sign was silhouetted against a wall of flame, a grim tombstone for the entertainment capital of the world. Sirens wailed from every direction, a dissonant symphony of collapse. Helicopters buzzed overhead, news choppers capturing the end of the world in high definition, until one of them spiraled out of control and crashed into a high-rise, adding another plume of fire to the skyline. Behdala checked his magazine. 15 rounds. He had 2 spares on his belt, 45 chances to live. He turned away from the dying freeway and headed into the suburbs, moving through the manicured backyards of multi-million-dollar homes. The juxtaposition was jarring. Swimming pools sparkling in the twilight, barbecue grills left abandoned with steaks burning to charcoal, and the distant, wet sounds of slaughter echoing off the stucco walls. He reached a street, a quiet cul-de-sac lined with palm trees that were catching the reflection of the distant fires. A yellow cab sat idling in the middle of the road, the driver's door open. Behdala approached cautiously, weapon raised. The interior was empty, but the meter was still running, ticking up dollars for a passenger who would never pay. He heard a rustle in the bushes to his right. He spun, leading with the gun. A golden retriever trotted out, whimpering, its golden fur matted with blood that wasn't its own. It looked at him with soulful, confused eyes before bolting down the street. Behdala lowered the weapon slightly, exhaling a breath he didn't know he was holding. Then the front door of the nearest house burst open. A man in a bathrobe stumbled out, clutching his throat, blood spurting between his fingers. Behind him, a woman in a torn evening gown pursued, her movement twitchy and insect-like. She leaped onto his back, her teeth sinking into his shoulder. The man fell, his head cracking against the pavement.
Behdala didn't intervene. It was too late. He was learning the new rules of America fast. You save who you can, and you leave the rest. He moved past them, sticking to the shadows, heading north toward the hills. He needed to get out of the density. The city was a trap, a concrete bowl filling with blood. As he ran, the texture of the world seemed to decay around him. The pristine lawns were trampled, the white picket fences smashed. A U.S. mail truck lay overturned, letters spilling out like confetti. Bills, birthday cards, jury summons, all meaningless paper now. He reached a commercial strip on Sunset Boulevard. The looting had already started. The glass front of a 7-Eleven was shattered, and people were scrambling over the jagged shards, grabbing water, beer, cigarettes. But mixed in with the looters were the infected. It was a chaotic melee in the strobe of a failing neon sign. Behdala saw a man beat an infected down with a skateboard, only to be bitten by a second one emerging from the back aisle. The survival of the fittest had begun, and the curve was steep. Behdala bypassed the store, hugging the brick wall of a guitar shop. He needed supplies, but not at the cost of a bite. He spotted an army surplus store 2 blocks down. Closed, metal grates down. But Behdala knew the owner, a paranoid old vet named Miller. If anyone was ready, it was Miller. He sprinted toward it, his boots crunching on broken glass and spent shell casings. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and burning rubber. He reached the steel door of the surplus store and pounded on it. "Miller, it's Behdala. Open up." Silence. Then the slide of a viewing port. A pair of terrified eyes peered out. "You bit?" Miller's voice was muffled. "No, let me in." The locks tumbled, 3 of them, and the door creaked open. Behdala slipped inside, and Miller slammed it shut, bolting it instantly. The store was dark, lit only by a few battery-powered lanterns. The walls were lined with tactical gear, knives, and decommissioned rifles. "It's happening," Miller whispered, clutching a shotgun. They said on the ham radio, "It's the whole country. New York, Chicago, Houston, gone." Behdala looked at the racks of gear. "I need ammo, Miller, and a map, a paper map." Miller nodded, gesturing to the back. "Take what you need. We're not opening for business again." Behdala grabbed a tactical vest, stuffing magazines into the pouches. He took a map of California, a first aid kit, and a combat knife. He was gearing up for war. "You staying?" Behdala asked, strapping the vest tight. Miller shook his head.
"I got a bunker in the Mojave. I'm leaving at dawn." "Dawn is too late," Behdala said, looking at the security monitors. The cameras showed the street outside. The crowd was growing. The infected were swarming. "Look." On the screen, a horde was moving down Sunset like a tidal wave of flesh. They weren't walking anymore. They were running. The virus, or whatever it was accelerating. "We leave now," Behdala commanded. "Back door. My truck is gone. We take yours." Miller hesitated, looking at his shop, his life's work. "It's just stuff, Miller. Let it burn." They moved to the rear exit, emerging into an alleyway cluttered with dumpsters and rotting garbage. The sky above was a swirling vortex of ash. They reached Miller's lifted Ford Raptor. It was a beast of a machine, built for the apocalypse. Miller threw the keys to Behdala. "You drive, I'll shoot." They roared out of the alley, the V8 engine screaming a challenge to the end of the world. Behdala swung the truck onto a side street, smashing through a wooden fence to avoid a burning barricade. They were heading for the hills, trying to rise above the smoke. As they climbed the winding roads of the Hollywood Hills, the city spread out below them in a panoramic nightmare. Los Angeles was a grid of fire. The skyscrapers of downtown were torches. The Santa Monica Pier was ablaze, the Ferris wheel turning slowly as it burned, collapsing into the dark ocean. And everywhere, the sound of screaming, a million voices crying out in a unified chorus of terror. Behdala gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. This was day 1. The Hollywood Hills were burning, and the American dream was ash in his mouth. He looked at the dashboard clock. 8 p.m. The night was just beginning. The Raptor's suspension groaned, not from the weight of the ammunition, but from the sheer violence with which Behdala threw it into the hairpin turns of Mulholland Drive.
The leather of the steering wheel creaked under his grip, a sound like dry bones snapping, audible even over the roar of the V8 and the distant omnipresent wail of the sirens below. To their left,
The Los Angeles basin was a cauldron of bioluminescent rot. The grid of the city, usually a carpet of golden electric jewels, was now a jagged map of orange fury. The Santa Ana winds had kicked up, the devil winds of folklore, hot and dry, whipping the flames into frenzied tornadoes that danced between the skyscrapers of downtown and the sprawling suburbia of the valley. Miller sat in the passenger seat, his boots resting on a crumpled in-and-out wrapper, a relic of a world that had ended 3 hours ago. He was checking the magazine of his AR-15, the metallic clack-clack of the action providing a rhythmic percussion to the chaos. "Temperature gauge is redlining, Behdala," Miller grunted, not looking up from the weapon. "Air intake is sucking in more ash than oxygen. We stall out here, we cook." Behdala didn't blink. His eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected the burning skyline like twin mirrors into hell. He didn't look at the road. He seemed to feel it, navigating the curves with a supernatural, jerky precision. "The engine likes the heat, Miller," Behdala said, his voice a low, raspy drone that seemed to vibrate in the truck's cab. "It breathes the fire, just like us, just like the pigeons." Miller ignored the pigeon comment. Behdala had been talking about the birds for days, whispering about how they were government drones, how they were watching the collapse with robotic indifference. Miller didn't care about the conspiracies. He cared about the tactical reality. And the tactical reality was that the wealthiest zip codes in America were currently turning into a slaughterhouse. They crested a ridge, the headlights of the Raptor cutting through a thick bank of smoke that smelled of burning eucalyptus and melting Tesla batteries. The road ahead was blocked.
A pile-up of luxury vehicles, a G-Wagon, a matte black Lamborghini Urus, and a Bentley formed a twisted barricade of German and Italian engineering. Rich panic. It was sloppy. They had tried to run, crashed into each other, and abandoned the metal husks. "Roadblock," Miller shouted, bracing his hand against the dashboard. "Speed bump," Behdala corrected. He didn't hit the brakes. He slammed the accelerator to the floor. The Raptor roared, a mechanical predator lunging for the kill. Behdala yanked the wheel hard right, aiming for the gap between the Bentley and the canyon wall. The truck mounted the dirt embankment, tilting at a 45-degree angle. Gravel sprayed like buckshot against the undercarriage. The passenger side mirror sheared off against the rock face with a screech of tearing plastic, but the truck held its grip. With a heavy thud that rattled their teeth, they slammed back onto the asphalt on the other side of the wreck. Miller exhaled, a sharp hiss. "Jesus, Bert, you trying to kill us before the fire does?" Behdala let out a short, high-pitched giggle. It was a sound devoid of humor, a sound that belonged in a haunted nursery, not a tactical vehicle. "We are ascending, Miller. We are going to the stars. The stars live in the hills." They were deep in the residential sector of the hills now. Here, the panic was different. Down in the flatlands, it was riot and looting. Up here, behind the 12-foot privacy hedges and the wrought iron gates, it was a silent, desperate purge. The electricity was flickering, the grid straining under the load of 1,000,000 air conditioners trying to fight the heat of the apocalypse. Suddenly, a figure stumbled into the road, waving frantic arms. It was a man in a tuxedo, his bow tie undone, holding a magnum of champagne in one hand and a golf club in the other. His face was a mask of soot and tears. Behdala slowed the truck to a crawl, the massive tires crunching over fallen palm fronds. "Help!"
"You have to help," the man screamed, running up to Behdala's window. He banged on the glass. "My wife, the gate won't open. The power is out and the backup generator failed. She's trapped in the garage with the Porsche. The fire is coming up the ravine." Behdala rolled down the window. The heat rushed in, suffocating and dry, carrying the scent of burning cedar and expensive perfume. He looked at the man, his head tilting to the side like a curious bird. "Is it a 911? Behdala asked softly. The man blinked, confused, hysteria bubbling in his throat. "What? Yes, it's a Turbo S. Please, you have a truck. You can ram the gate." Behdala nodded slowly. "A Turbo S. Very fast. German. Efficient." He stared at the man for a long, uncomfortable silence. The firelight flickered on Behdala's unibrow, casting a shadow over his eyes. "But you have champagne." "Take it." The man shoved the bottle through the window. "Take it all. I have watches. I have crypto cold storage. Just get the gate open." Behdala took the bottle. He inspected the label. "Vintage," he murmured. Then, without looking away from the bottle, he pressed the window switch. The glass rose, shutting out the man's pleas. Behdala put the truck in gear. "Bert, we could ram the gate," Miller said, his voice low. He wasn't pleading, just stating a tactical option. Good cover in a compound like that. No, Behdala said, accelerating. The man in the tuxedo ran alongside the truck for a few yards, screaming, before falling behind into the smoke. The Turbo S is a coffin, Miller. We don't open coffins, we make them. They drove on. The road wound higher, closer to the Hollywood sign. The vegetation here was dry scrub, kindling waiting for a spark. The wind was howling now, shaking the truck. Embers, bright orange fireflies of destruction, zipped horizontally across their face. Up ahead, the flashing lights of a private security detail cut through the gloom. 3 black SUVs blocked the road completely.
Men in tactical gear, looking far more professional than the LAPD, stood behind open doors, rifles raised. This wasn't the police. This was Merriweather, or Blackwater, or whatever private army the billionaires had hired to seal off their enclave. "Contact front," Miller barked. He kicked his door open before the truck even stopped, using the frame for cover, bringing the AR-15 up. One of the security contractors shouted through a megaphone, "Turn around. This is a restricted zone. Lethal force is authorized. Turn around immediately." Behdala stopped the Raptor 20 yards away. The idling engine was a low growl. He turned to Miller. "They have nice uniforms, very crisp. They have stopping power, Bert. Back it up." Behdala reached under his seat and pulled out a flare gun. It was orange, plastic, and looked like a toy in his pale hands. "The wind is blowing towards them, Miller. Santa Ana loves us." "Bert, don't." Behdala leaned out the window and fired. He didn't aim at the men. He aimed at the dry, overgrown brush on the steep hillside, directly below the SUVs. The flare hissed through the air, a streak of red phosphorus, and disappeared into the chaparral. For a second, nothing happened. Then a roar. The brush, drier than parchment, didn't just catch fire, it exploded. The wind caught the flames and shoved them instantly up the slope, a wall of heat engulfing the road in seconds. The security contractors screamed as the fire flank maneuvered them. The SUVs were bathed in heat intense enough to bubble paint. "Fire superiority," Behdala whispered. The contractors broke formation, scrambling into their vehicles to reverse, but the smoke was too thick. They were blinding themselves. Behdala gunned the Raptor, driving straight towards the wall of fire. "Hold your breath," Miller yelled, ducking his head. Behdala didn't duck. He kept his eyes wide open, staring into the inferno as they drove through it. The heat inside the cab spiked, searing their lungs.
For 3 seconds, their world was nothing but swirling orange violence. Then they punched through the other side, the paint on the Raptor's hood blistering, smoke trailing from the wheel wells. Behind them, the ammo in the security SUVs began to cook off, popping like strings of firecrackers. Behdala laughed again, that dry, rattling sound. "Popcorn," he said, "for the movie." They reached the crest of the hill, the famous Mulholland scenic overlook. Usually, this place was crowded with tourists taking selfies. Now it was empty, save for a single coyote that trotted across the pavement, unmothered by the apocalypse. Behdala pulled the truck to the edge of the cliff and killed the engine. The silence that followed wasn't silent at all. It was a roar of a city dying. Below them, Los Angeles was a masterpiece of destruction. The downtown skyscrapers were torches, flames licking out of shattered windows 40 stories up. The 405 freeway was a ribbon of red taillights that wasn't moving, a river of blood that had coagulated. To the west, the Santa Monica Pier was gone, collapsed into the black ocean, the Pacific reflecting the fire like a dark mirror. Miller stepped out of the truck, coughing. He walked to the stone wall and looked down. The heat rising from the basin was palpable, an updraft of misery. "Whole damn country is probably like this," Miller said, spitting a glob of soot-stained saliva over the edge. D.C., New York, Chicago, we're watching the end of the Roman Empire, Bert. Behdala stayed in the driver's seat for a moment, caressing the steering wheel. Then he stepped out. He was wearing his signature vertical striped sweater, now stained with grease and ash. He looked out over the city, his expression unreadable. "Not Rome," Behdala said softly. He walked over to a coin-operated telescope mounted on the overlook. He reached into his pocket,
fished out a quarter, and inserted it. The mechanism clicked.
He peered through the eyepiece, training it not on the fires, but on a specific mansion on a neighboring hill, a glass and steel fortress that was currently being overrun by a mob that had climbed up from the canyon. "What do you see?" Miller asked, reloading his weapon. "I see the ant farm," Behdala murmured. Through the lens, he watched tiny figures smashing glass. He watched a man fall from a balcony into a swimming pool that was glowing orange from the reflection of the fire. "They are shaking the box, Miller, and the ants are confused." He pulled away from the telescope. The wind whipped his dark hair. "We need a base, somewhere high, somewhere with thick walls." "Griffith Observatory," Miller suggested. "Defensible, high ground, one road in." Behdala shook his head. "Too public. Too many people will have the same idea. The sheep run to the shepherd. We are not sheep." He pointed a long pale finger toward the west, toward the jagged silhouette of the Getty Center, perched like an acropolis on the 405 pass. "The museum. It is made of travertine stone, fireproof, bulletproof, and full of pictures of dead people." "The Getty? That's across the pass. We'd have to cross the 405. It's a parking lot, Bert. We'll get swarmed." "Not the highway," Behdala said. "We take the fire roads, the trails. The raptor is a goat. We go where the cars cannot." They climbed back into the truck. The air quality was worsening. The ash was falling like snow now, thick gray flakes that coated the windshield. Behdala hit the wipers, smearing the gray into a murky paste. As they reversed, a sound cut through the roar of the fire. A helicopter, a news chopper, flying low, desperate for the money shot of the burning hills. It banked hard, its spotlight sweeping over them, blindingly bright. "We're spotted," Miller said. "If they're broadcasting, they just told every looter in a 5-mile radius there's a working truck up here." Behdala squinted into the light. "They are moths."
Drawn to the light. Suddenly the chopper jerked. A trail of smoke spiraled up from the darkness below. A shoulder-fired missile, or perhaps just a lucky RPG shot from the chaos in the streets. The missile clipped the tail rotor. The helicopter spun violently, the sound of the rotor changing from a beat to a scream. It lost altitude, spinning down into the canyon, crashing into the hillside with a blooming fireball that shook the ground beneath the Raptor's tires. "That wasn't looting," Miller said, his face grim. "That was military hardware. Someone down there is organizing." "Civil war," Behdala said, shifting gears. "Blue against red, rich against poor, alive against dead." He turned to Miller, a rare, crooked smile stretching his face. "We are just tourists, Miller, enjoying the sights." They peeled out, heading west along the ridgeline. The road narrowed, turning from asphalt to dirt as Behdala turned onto a maintenance trail used by powerline crews. The truck bounced violently. Branches whipped against the windows. "We need supplies," Miller shouted over the engine. "Water, ammo. The Getty won't have food." "The houses," Behdala said. "We stop at the next house that isn't burning." 10 minutes later they found it, a mid-century modern architectural marvel cantilevered over the canyon. It was dark, the power cut, but the fire hadn't reached it yet. Behdala rammed the front gate, the iron buckling under the Raptor's grill guard. They rolled up the long driveway, past a collection of modern art sculptures that looked like twisted metal, ironic considering the twisted metal of the real cars burning on the freeway below. They dismounted. Miller took point, sweeping the driveway with his rifle. Behdala followed, holding a tire iron he had pulled from under the seat. He moved silently, his footsteps making no sound on the concrete pavers. The front door was solid oak. Behdala didn't wait for Miller to check it. He swung the tire iron, smashing the side window. He reached in and unlocked the door. Inside, the house was a tomb of silence. The expansive living room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the burning city. It was a beautiful, terrifying view. On the coffee table, a half-eaten meal sat cold. A television was paused on a news broadcast, the frozen face of an anchor wide-eyed in terror. "Clear left," Miller called out from the kitchen. "I got water, bottled stuff, Fiji, cases of it. Pantry is stocked." Behdala wandered into the master bedroom. It was lavish, a king-sized bed with silk sheets. He walked to the closet, rows of designer suits. He ran his hand over the fabrics. Then he stopped. In the corner of the room, huddled in the panic room doorway which had failed to close, sat a golden retriever. The dog whimpered. It was shaking, terrified by the smell of smoke and the noise. Behdala stared at the dog. The dog stared back. "Bert," Miller yelled from the hall, "we got movement outside. 2 vehicles coming up the drive. Raiders." Behdala didn't answer. He crouched down in front of the dog. "You are a good boy," he whispered, "but you are soft. You were made for a world of kibble and air conditioning." The sound of breaking glass came from the living room. Shouts, rough voices. "Miller," Behdala called out, his voice calm. "We have guests." "I'm engaging," Miller shouted. Gunfire erupted in the living room. The sharp crack of the AR-15 mingled with the booming return fire of shotguns. Behdala stood up. He tightened his grip on the tire iron. He didn't rush to help Miller. Miller was a soldier. He could handle a few looters. Behdala looked at the dog one last time. "Stay," he commanded. He walked into the hallway. A man in a bandana and a leather jacket was kicking open the bedroom doors, holding a machete. He saw Behdala and froze. Behdala didn't look like a threat. He looked like a strange, lanky accountant who had gotten lost.
"Give me the keys to the truck," the raider screamed, raising the machete. Behdala tilted his head. "Keys," he repeated. "Metal teeth to open metal beasts." The raider lunged. Behdala stepped to the side with a fluid, unnatural grace. He swung the tire iron. It wasn't a frantic swing. It was a calculated blow to the kneecap. Bone crunched. The raider screamed and dropped to the floor. Behdala stood over him. The man was writhing, clutching his leg. Behdala leaned down, his face inches from the man's. "Do you know why the hills are burning?" Behdala asked, his voice a whisper amidst the gunfire echoing from the living room. "Screw you," the man spat. "Because they are purifying," Behdala said, "cleaning the slate. You are just dirt on the lens." He left the man moaning on the floor and walked into the living room. Miller was behind the kitchen island, trading shots with 2 men crouched behind the sofa. The room was getting torn apart. Bullets shattered the expensive vases and ripped through the abstract paintings. Behdala walked into the open. He didn't run, he didn't crouch. He just walked across the room toward the sliding glass doors that led to the balcony. The raiders were so confused by this figure strolling through the kill zone that they hesitated. That split second was all Miller needed. Pop, pop. One raider went down. The other turned his shotgun toward Behdala. "Hey, freak," the raider yelled. Behdala stopped and looked at the man. He pointed out the window, at the panoramic view of the burning city. "Look," Behdala said. "It's beautiful." The raider blinked, distracted by the sheer insanity of the statement. Miller popped up and put a round through the raider's chest. The man slumped over the expensive white sofa, bleeding out onto the fabric. Silence returned to the house, save for the wind howling outside. "You're insane," Miller said, changing magazines. "Walking in the open like that." "They couldn't shoot me, Miller," Behdala said, picking up a silver candlestick from the dining table and inspecting it. "I am part of the scenery." Miller shook his head, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. "Grab the water. We need to move. That gunfire will draw more of them." They loaded the Raptor with cases of Fiji water and boxes of high-end protein bars found in the pantry. Behdala paused at the front door. He looked back at the bedroom where the dog was hiding. He whistled, a sharp, piercing sound. The golden retriever trotted out, tail between its legs. It looked at Behdala, then at the open door of the truck. "Get in," Behdala said. The dog jumped into the back seat of the Raptor. Miller looked at the dog, then at Behdala. "We're running a rescue shelter now?" "Emergency rations," Behdala said, deadpan. Miller stared at him, trying to gauge if he was joking. With Behdala, you never knew, and that was the scariest part. Miller just shook his head and climbed in. Drive, west, to the Getty. They roared back onto the trail. The night was deepening, but it wasn't getting dark. The fire was providing a permanent, flickering twilight. It was 9 p.m. on day 1. The American dream was burning down, and Behdala was driving a Ford Raptor through the ashes, a slight smile playing on his lips as he watched the world end through a windshield smeared with gray snow. The Raptor hit the pavement of Mulholland Drive, the suspension swallowing the cracked asphalt like a sedative. The headlights cut through the swirling gray flurry, illuminating not snow, but the cremated remains of the Santa Monica Mountains. It was a blizzard of carbon. Miller gripped the oh shit handle above the passenger door until his knuckles turned the color of old bone. He stared out the window, his breath fogging the glass, watching the panoramic suicide of Los Angeles. To their left, the San Fernando Valley was a grid of failing electricity and blooming fires.
To their right, the basin stretched out toward the ocean, a sea of red brake lights that weren't moving. The 405 freeway was a parking lot of the damned. "Look at it," Behdala said softly. His voice didn't carry the tremble of adrenaline that Miller felt rattling his own ribcage. It was smooth, appreciative, like a critic standing before a Rothko. The circulatory system of the city, clogged, necrotic. "Just drive, Bert," Miller snapped, his eyes fixed on a plume of black smoke rising from a mansion perched precariously on a ridge. "Stop analyzing it. Just get us to the Getty." "The Getty is a tomb, Miller. White travertine stone imported from Italy, built to withstand earthquakes and fire. A fortress for art while the peasants burn." Behdala adjusted the rear-view mirror, checking on the golden retriever. The dog was curled in a tight ball on the leather seat, shivering despite the heat radiating through the floorboards. "Good dog, marbling nicely." Miller whipped his head around. "Stop it, we aren't eating the dog." "Not yet," Behdala conceded. He spun the wheel hard to the right. The truck lurched off the pavement. They were bypassing the gridlock on Mulholland, diving nose first into a fire trail that cut through the scrub brush, the brush that was currently smoldering. The Raptor's tires chewed through the dry vegetation, crushing sage and chaparral. Branches whipped against the side of the truck, sounding like skeletal fingers trying to claw their way inside. "This is insane," Miller muttered. "The fire is right there." "The fire is everywhere, Miller. It's democratic. It doesn't care about your zip code." Behdala gunned the engine. The truck roared, surging up a steep embankment. They crested a ridge and the heat hit them through the glass, a physical wave of pressure. Below them, the Sepulveda Pass was an inferno. The hillsides were fully engulfed, towering walls of orange flame licking at the night sky.
The smoke was thick, oily, smelling of burning eucalyptus and melting plastic, but the true horror was the highway. The 405 was a river of stalled steel, thousands of cars, bumper to bumper, trapped between the concrete median and the burning hills. People had abandoned their vehicles. Tiny figures were running between the lanes, climbing over hoods, dragging suitcases, clutching pets. Some were just sitting on the roofs of their cars, watching the fire come down the hill, resigned to the inevitable. "They're trapped," Miller whispered. The horror of it hollowed out his stomach. "Bert, we have to do something." "We are doing something," Behdala said, shifting the truck into four-wheel low. "We're surviving. That is the only moral imperative left. We can't just leave them." "Miller," Behdala turned to look at him, and for a second the reflection of the fire in his eyes made them look entirely black, voids where empathy should have been. "There are 10 million people in this county. If we stop for one, we die with them. Is that what you want? To die heroically in a traffic jam?" Miller didn't answer. He couldn't. The logic was cold, brutal, and irrefutable. Behdala navigated the truck down the fire road, sliding on loose shale, heading toward the service entrance of the Getty Center. The museum sat atop the hill like an acropolis, its white walls reflecting the fires of hell, remaining pristine and untouched amidst the chaos. As they neared the bottom of the ravine, the fire road intersected with Sepulveda Boulevard. Here, the chaos was close enough to touch. A Tesla Model X was burning violently by the roadside, its lithium batteries venting jets of white flame that sounded like jet engines. A group of people were trying to push a stalled delivery truck out of an intersection. Behdala didn't slow down. "Bert!" Miller screamed as the nose of the Raptor bore down on the group. Behdala leaned on the horn, not a polite beep, but a sustained, aggressive blare.
The group scattered, diving into the ditch. One man, holding a tire iron, stood his ground for a fraction of a second, shouting something lost to the roar of the fire, before diving aside. The Raptor clipped the side mirror of the stalled truck, shattering it, and plowed through. "You almost killed him." Miller was shaking now, his hands gripping his knees. "He was blocking the extraction route," Behdala said calmly. "Obstacles are either removed or circumvented. I chose to remove." They swung onto the Getty Center Drive. The main gate was closed, a heavy steel barrier designed to keep out terrorists and vandals. A private security guard, looking terrified in his high-vis vest, waved a flashlight at them, signaling them to stop. Behdala slowed the truck, rolling down the window. The heat rushed in, smelling of sulfur and fear. The roar of the fire was deafening now, a constant low-frequency rumble that vibrated in their teeth. "Turn around," the guard screamed, coughing into his sleeve. "The center is on lockdown. No entry. The fire is jumping the freeway." "We have a delivery," Behdala said. He held up a hand. It was empty. He just smiled. A calm, terrifying smile amidst the apocalypse. "What? Are you crazy? Get out of here." The guard reached for his belt. He had a sidearm. Behdala's eyes snapped to the gun, then back to the guard's face. "Don't," Behdala said. It wasn't a threat. It was an order. The guard hesitated. In that split second of hesitation, the civilized man's pause to consider consequences, Behdala accelerated. The Raptor slammed into the gate arm. It wasn't the heavy steel gate, just the traffic arm, and it snapped like a dry twig. The guard jumped back, shouting, but Behdala was already past him, accelerating up the winding tram road. "Jesus Christ," Miller exhaled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We're breaking into a museum." "We're securing high ground," Behdala corrected. "Tactical advantage. Stone walls, filtered air, water cisterns."
It's a castle, Miller. And in the Dark Ages, you want to be inside the castle, not in the village. The road up to the museum was a marvel of engineering, a smooth curve of concrete rising above the smog. As they ascended, the air cleared slightly. The smoke was still there, but they were rising above the worst of the choking density. The dog in the back seat sat up and let out a low growl. Miller looked back. "What's wrong with him?" "He smells it," Behdala said. "Smells what?" "The predator," Behdala murmured. "Or the competition." They reached the arrival plaza at the top of the hill. The tram station was empty, the sleek white trams sitting silent on their tracks. The expansive travertine courtyard was deserted, illuminated by emergency floodlights and the ambient glow of the burning city below. It was surreal, a modernist utopia suspended above a burning hellscape. Behdala parked the truck right on the pristine plaza stones, next to a sculpture that looked like twisted metal. Ironic, considering the twisted metal on the freeway below. He killed the engine. Silence, or as close to silence as Los Angeles could get. The roar of the fire was distant here, a background hum. "Out," Behdala said. Miller opened the door and nearly fell out. His legs felt like jelly. He took a breath. The air was hot, but breathable. Behdala opened the back door. "Come," he commanded. The golden retriever hesitated, then hopped out, its nails clicking on the expensive stone. It stayed close to Miller's leg. "Why are we here, Bert? Really?" Miller looked around at the silent, white buildings. "There's no food here. It's a museum." Behdala walked to the edge of the plaza, looking out over the railing. The view was apocalyptic. The entire 405 corridor was a river of fire. The Hollywood Hills were burning. Brentwood was burning. The smoke obscured the ocean, but the glow reflected off the water, turning the Pacific into a cauldron of blood. "There is a restaurant," Behdala said, not turning around. "The restaurant at the Getty. High-end. Pantry stocked with non-perishables. Wine cellar. But that's not why we're here." "Then why?" Behdala pointed down at the city. "Perspective. Down there you are a statistic. Up here you are a spectator. Survival is 10% preparation and 90% mindset. You have to detach, Miller. You have to accept that the world you knew, the world of Starbucks and credit scores and traffic laws, is gone. It burned up 10 minutes ago." He turned to face Miller. The orange light cast deep shadows on Behdala's face, making his eyes look sunken, skeletal. "And up here," Behdala continued, "we can see who is coming for us." Miller shivered. "Who is coming for us?" "Everyone," Behdala said, eventually. A noise, a sharp crack. It echoed off the stone walls. The dog barked, a sharp, warning sound. Behdala didn't flinch. He just tilted his head. Gunshot, small caliber, maybe a .38. Close. "Here?" Miller spun around. "I thought you said it was empty." "I said it was a castle. Castles have guards." Behdala reached into the back of his waistband and pulled out a Glock 19. Miller hadn't even seen him take it from the house. "Stay behind me. Keep the dog quiet. If the dog barks again..." Behdala let the sentence hang, heavy with the promise of violence. They moved toward the main stairs.
the grand staircase that led up to the museum proper. The architecture was imposing, sharp angles and massive blocks of rough-hewn travertine. It felt like walking into a temple of a dead civilization. Another crack, then a shout. They reached the top of the stairs. The main courtyard lay before them, a long expanse of water fountains, now dry, and gardens. In the center of the courtyard, near the fountain, 3 figures stood over a fourth. Flashlight beams cut through the gloom. "Security," Miller whispered. "It's just security. Look closer," Behdala hissed.
The figures weren't wearing uniforms. They were wearing tactical gear, but it was mismatched. Hockey pads, camouflage pants, balaclavas. Looters? No, too organized. Malicious. The rapid breakdown of society had birthed the neighborhood warlords faster than Miller could have imagined. The figure on the ground was a security guard. He was on his knees, hands behind his head. Behdala pulled Miller behind a limestone pillar. The dog whined softly, and Behdala reached down, clamping his hand over the animal's muzzle with a grip that looked painful. The dog went silent, eyes wide. 3 hostiles, Behdala whispered, his voice sounding almost bored. 1 hostage. They want the keys. They want the fortress. We should go back to the truck, Miller pleaded. We can leave. And go where? Back to the fire? No, we claimed this hill. Squatters' rights. Behdala checked the chamber of his Glock. Miller, hold the dog. What? No, Bert, don't. Hold the dog. Behdala shoved the leash into Miller's trembling hand. If you let him go and he runs out there, they will shoot him. And then I will be annoyed. You don't want to see me annoyed. Miller grabbed the leash, wrapping it around his wrist. Behdala stepped away from the pillar, moving into the shadows of the colonnade. He moved with a disturbing grace, silent as the ash falling from the sky. Miller watched, paralyzed. He saw the militiamen shouting at the guard. "Where's the generator control?" one of the men shouted, kicking the guard in the ribs. "We know this place has backup power. Turn it on." "I don't have the codes," the guard sobbed. Wrong answer. The man raised a rifle, an AR-15 style, looking brand new. Behdala didn't yell freeze. He didn't announce his presence. He simply fired. Pop, pop. 2 shots, 2 thuds. The man with the rifle dropped, a dark hole appearing in his neck. The man next to him stunned, pitting around to the shoulder, spinning him to the ground.
The third man panicked fired into the darkness, the muzzle flashes lighting up the white stone walls like strobe lights. Bullets chipped the travertine, sending dust spraying into the air. Miller crouched low, hugging the dog. The dog was trembling violently against him. It's okay, Miller whispered, though he was talking to himself. Silence fell over the courtyard. Drop it. Behdala's voice came from the dark, disembodied. The third man, the only one standing, looked around wildly. Show yourself. Drop the weapon or I put the next one in your femoral artery. You'll bleed out in 3 minutes. It's a messy way to go. The man hesitated. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant roar of the Los Angeles fire. Clatter. The gun hit the stones. Behdala stepped out of the shadows. He walked casually toward the men, his gun held loosely at his side. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a janitor cleaning up a spill. He kicked the rifle away from the man on the ground. He looked at the security guard, who was staring up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Get up," Behdala said to the guard. The guard scrambled to his feet. "You work here?" Behdala asked. "Yes, night shift." "Do you have keys to the kitchen?" The kitchen?" The guard blinked, his brain unable to process the shift from execution to catering. "The food, Gerald, or whatever your name is. We're hungry." Behdala gestured back toward the pillar. "Miller, bring the rations." Miller stood up, legs shaking, dragging the golden retriever with him. He walked into the open courtyard. The dead man lay in a growing pool of blood that looked black in the moonlight. The wounded man was groaning, clutching his shoulder. "What about them?" Miller asked, his voice cracking. He pointed at the militiamen. Behdala looked at the survivor, then at the wounded man. He crouched down next to the wounded one. "Who sent you?" Behdala asked. "Go to hell," the man spat. Behdala sighed.
He stood up and looked at the security guard. "Lock them in the security office. If they bleed on the floor, make them clean it up." "And if they resist?" the guard asked, finding a sudden spine now that the tables had turned. Behdala handed the guard the militiaman's rifle. "Then you assert dominance. It's the new world, my friend.
Property rights are enforced by ballistics. Behdala turned and walked toward the museum entrance, the glass doors reflecting the orange sky. "Come on, Miller," Behdala called out, not looking back. "I think I saw an 82 Bordal on the menu online. It should pair well with the end of the world." Miller looked at the guard, who was holding the rifle awkwardly. They exchanged a look, a shared moment of insanity. He's crazy," the guard whispered. "Yeah," Miller said, patting the dog's head. "But he's the only reason we're not burning on the 405. Miller followed Behdala toward the glass doors. Above them, the sky was a bruised purple and violent orange. Ash fell like snow, coating the white stones of the Getty in a layer of gray filth. Behdala pushed the doors open. The air conditioning inside was still running. It hit Miller's face, cool and sterile. The smell of smoke vanished, replaced by the smell of floor wax and old paper. Behdala stood in the center of the rotunda. He spread his arms wide. "Home sweet home," Behdala said. He looked at the dog. "Don't get comfortable, Mud. We'll see how the food supply holds out." The dog wagged its tail. Behdala smiled, and for the first time, it didn't look entirely like a threat. It looked like he was having fun. Miller walked to the window. He looked down at the city one last time. Los Angeles was dying. The lights were going out, block by block, replaced by the flickering rage of the fires. The screams were too far away to hear, but he knew they were there. He turned his back on the window. "Red or white?" Miller asked. Behdala chuckled. "Red."
Always red. And outside, the Hollywood Hills continued to burn. Miller poured the Cabernet into a plastic cup he'd found near the water cooler. The contrast was offensive. A $1,000 bottle of Screaming Eagle weeping its crimson legs down the side of a disposable cup manufactured in a factory that probably didn't exist anymore. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple, the smoke choking out the sunset, but inside the West Pavilion of the Getty, the climate control hummed with a defiant, electrical arrogance. It was 72 degrees. The humidity was perfectly regulated to preserve canvases stretched 300 years ago. It was the temperature of indifference. Behdala didn't use a cup. He drank straight from the bottle, his lips forming a seal that looked too tight, too mechanical. When he lowered the glass neck, his teeth were stained purple, giving his permanent rictus grin a ghoulish, arterial quality. He was staring at a painting, Rembrandt's, St. Bartholomew. The saint looked worried, holding a knife. Behdala looked delighted. "Do you think he knew?" Behdala asked. His voice didn't echo in the large gallery. It just sort of slid along the floor, heavy and oily. "The artist, do you think he knew that one day his work would be more valuable than the city it lived in? That people would let 1,000,000 neighbors burn to save this square of canvas?" Miller walked over to a bench and sat down heavily. The adrenaline of the ascent of Sepulveda was fading, replaced by a leaden exhaustion that felt like gravity had doubled. "It's stone, Bert. The Getty is travertine stone. It's fireproof. That's why we're here, not for the art." "Oh, Miller," Behdala whispered, turning his head without moving his shoulders like an owl. "We are always here for the art. Watching things dying is the highest form of aesthetics." Miller rubbed his eyes. The soot from the drive-up was embedded in his pores.
He looked at the dog, a scruffy terrier mix they'd picked up near Skirble. The dog was curled up at the base of a marble pedestal, twitching in its sleep. Even the animal knew to shut down, to conserve energy. "I need to check the perimeter," Miller said, though he didn't want to move. If the tram tunnel isn't blocked, the fire could create a chimney effect, or people could come up. Behdala laughed. It was a dry sound, like dead leaves skittering on pavement. "People. No. There are no people left down there, Miller. Only fuel, and the fuel is busy burning." Miller ignored him and stood up. He needed to get away from Behdala's eyes. Those eyes, they were wide, unblinking, the pupils pinpricks in a sea of white. They were the eyes of a creature that watched predator drones with the same mild interest as it watched a sitcom. Miller walked out of the gallery, his boots squeaking on the polished floor. He made his way to the terrace. The south pavilion blocked some of the wind, but the heat was still palpable, a physical weight pressing against the glass doors before he even pushed them open. When he stepped out onto the travertine balcony, the roar hit him. It wasn't silence. The apocalypse isn't quiet.
It was a low-frequency rumble, the sound of the earth grinding its teeth. To the south, the 405 freeway was a river of stagnant metal. The cars weren't moving. They were abandoned husks, some burning, some dark. The red taillights stretched all the way to the horizon, a vein of clotted blood. The fire had jumped the highway near Wilshire. Miller could see the VA hospital grounds glowing orange. The federal building was a silhouette against a wall of flame that seemed to be reaching for the helicopters that buzzed impotently overhead, dropping water that evaporated before it hit the ground. Miller gripped the railing. The stone was warm.
Below him, the meticulously manicured gardens of the Getty were dark, the central garden's maze of azaleas a black void waiting for the spark. But beyond the sanctuary of the hill, Los Angeles was putting on a show. Century City was flickering. He watched as a transformer blew near the Fox Plaza, a brilliant blue-white arc that illuminated the smoke for a split second, revealing the skeletal shapes of skyscrapers. Then darkness again, swallowed by the orange glow. He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket. He had 3 left. He lit one, the flame of the lighter trembling in his hand. "Smoking is prohibited on the grounds," a voice said. Miller jumped, nearly dropping the cigarette. Behdala was standing right behind him. He hadn't heard footsteps. He hadn't heard the door open. Behdala was just there. He was holding a bag of Cheetos now, the bright orange dust coating his fingers, matching the glow of the city below. "Jesus, Bert," Miller hissed. "The irony," Behdala mused, looking out at the inferno. "You worry about lung cancer while the air quality index is currently death." "What happens when the power goes, Bert?" Miller asked, taking a drag. "The generators won't last forever. The AC dies, the filters stop, the smoke comes in." "Then we adapt," Behdala said, shoving a handful of Cheetos into his mouth. Crunch, crunch, crunch. "We are Americans, Miller. We have a profound capacity for ignoring the inevitable until it is eating our legs." Behdala pointed a powdered finger toward the east, toward Hollywood. "Look, the sign." Miller squinted. Through the haze, miles away, the Hollywood Hills were a wreath of fire. The sign itself was obscured, but the ridge was ablaze. It looked like a volcano had erupted in Griffith Park. "The script is being rewritten," Behdala said softly. "Act 4, the part where the heroes realize the cavalry isn't coming, because the cavalry melted on the I-5. Miller looked at Behdala. In the flickering light of the burning city, Behdala's face looked smooth, almost plastic. He didn't look scared. He didn't look sad. He looked like a satisfied customer at a buffet. "Who are you, Bert?" Miller asked. It was the question he'd been afraid to ask since he found the man standing in the middle of a looting riot in Van Nuys, unmoving, untouched, wearing that yellow polo shirt that never seemed to get dirty. Behdala smiled. He turned slowly to face Miller. The reflection of the fires danced in his eyes, making it look like his head was empty, filled only with flames. "I'm the audience, Miller," Behdala said, "and I'm giving this season a standing ovation." A loud boom echoed up the canyon, a gas main, maybe a gas station. A plume of fire mushroomed into the sky near Westwood, turning the clouds blood red. "Bedtime," Behdala announced abruptly. "Big day tomorrow. We have to raid the cafeteria before the rats get brave. The rats are going to be very brave, Miller. They know the cats are dead." Behdala turned and walked back inside, leaving the door open. Miller stood alone on the balcony, smoking his cigarette down to the filter, watching the city of angels burn itself into demons. Sleep was a suggestion, not a reality. Miller lay on a leather bench in the entrance hall of the East Pavilion. The dog was pressed against his shin, shivering. The emergency lights were on, casting long, sickly green shadows across the rotunda. The air conditioning was struggling now. He could smell it, the acrid tang of burning plastic, burning wood, burning hair. It was seeping in through the vents. Miller dozed in jagged bursts. In his dreams, he was back on the 405, stuck in traffic. But the cars weren't cars, they were coffins on wheels, and Behdala was walking between the lanes, knocking on the windows, asking if they had any Grey Poupon. He woke up with a gasp. The dog was growling, a low, throat-vibrating sound. Miller sat up, his hand going to the pistol in his waistband. The rotunda was silent,
save for the distant hum of the backup generators. "Quiet," Miller whispered to the dog. The dog barked, a sharp, piercing sound that echoed off the high glass walls. Then Miller heard it, the sound of shattering glass, not nearby, downstairs, near the tram station entrance. Miller scrambled to his feet. He checked the magazine. 12 rounds. He moved toward the stairs, keeping low. Where was Behdala? Miller reached the landing and looked down into the lower lobby. The glass doors that led to the tram arrival plaza were smashed. Through the jagged hole, smoke was pouring in, thick and gray. And through the smoke, shapes were moving. Silhouettes. 3 of them. They moved with a jerky, frantic energy. "Hello?" one of them called out. A woman's voice, cracked with smoke inhalation and hysteria. "Is anyone here? We saw the lights." Miller lowered the gun slightly. Survivors. Just people. Desperate people who had climbed the hill. "Stay back," Miller shouted. "I'm armed." The shapes froze. "Please," a male voice begged. "We have a kid. She's burned. We need water. The fire, it's right behind us. It's climbing the succulents." Miller hesitated. The Getty was a fortress. If he let them in, he opened the seal. But they had a kid. "Come up slowly," Miller commanded. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The 3 figures emerged from the smoke. A man, a woman, and a teenage girl. They were covered in ash, their clothes torn. The girl was limping, her leg wrapped in a bloody t-shirt. They looked like ghosts dredged up from the underworld. They started up the stairs, sobbing with relief. And then Miller saw him. Behdala was standing at the top of the stairs, on the opposite side of the landing. He was holding a fire axe. He must have taken it from the emergency case on the wall. The red paint of the axe handle matched the tie he wasn't wearing.
"Bert, no," Miller said, raising his hand. Behdala looked at the survivors. He tilted his head. "Unauthorized entry," he deadpanned. "No tickets, no reservations." "They need help, Bert," Miller said, stepping between Behdala and the stairs. "They are carriers," Behdala said. His voice lost its playful lilt. It was flat, cold. "Carriers of panic, carriers of consumption. We have limited resources, Miller. The wine cellar is deep, but the water tanks are finite." "Please," the woman at the bottom of the stairs cried. She saw the axe. She saw the look on Behdala's face. It was the look of a butcher assessing a side of beef. "We just need water." "Go back down," Behdala said. "We can't," the man screamed. "The hill is on fire." "Then burn with it," Behdala smiled. Miller pointed his gun at Behdala. "Drop the axe, Bert. I mean it." Behdala looked at the gun. Then he looked at Miller. His smile widened, stretching the skin of his face until it looked like it might tear. "You won't shoot me, Miller. I'm the comic relief. I'm the mascot. Try me." Behdala chuckled. He lowered the axe. "Very well. Democracy in action. But when the water runs out, Miller, remember this moment. Remember that you chose empathy over survival. Empathy is a very calorically expensive emotion." Behdala turned and walked away, dragging the axe tip along the floor. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound set Miller's teeth on edge. Miller rushed down the stairs to help the family. "Get up here, quickly. We have a first aid kit in the security office." As he helped the limping girl up the stairs, Miller looked back toward the darkness of the gallery where Behdala had disappeared. He felt a cold knot in his stomach. He hadn't saved these people. He had just brought them into the cage with the tiger. Morning didn't break. The darkness just turned a lighter shade of gray. The sun was a dim copper coin behind a blanket of smog so thick you could taste the particulates on your tongue.
It tasted like burning tires and old pine. The family, names David, Sarah, and the girl, Chloe, were huddled in the security office. Miller had bandaged Chloe's leg. It was a bad burn, 2nd degree, blistering and angry. They were drinking water greedily from the cooler. Miller stood by the monitors. Most of the cameras were dead, the signals lost as the fiber optics melted down the hill. But one camera, pointed at the tram arrival plaza, was still working on battery backup. The fire had arrived. Miller watched on the grainy black and white screen. The flames weren't behaving like normal fire. They were moving with purpose. They licked up the white travertine walls of the arrival plaza, blackening the pristine stone. The heat was intense enough to distort the image, and amidst the fire, things were moving. Miller leaned in closer to the monitor. He squinted. Coyotes. A pack of them, dozens. They were running up the tram track, ahead of the flames. But they weren't running away. They were running up, and behind them, a mountain lion. The famous one, P-22? No, P-22 was dead. This was another, a shadow of muscle and claws. They were converging on the Getty. The animals of the hills, driven mad by the heat, were seeking the high ground. "We have a problem," Miller muttered. He turned to leave the room and nearly collided with Behdala. Behdala was wearing a security guard's blazer. It was 2 sizes too small. The sleeves ended at his forearms. He had a walkie-talkie clipped to his shoulder, though there was no one to talk to. "Morning briefing," Behdala chirped. "The coffee machine is broken. I am distraught. Bert, the animals are coming up. The fire is pushing them. We're going to have a zoo in the courtyard." "Nature is healing," Behdala said. He peered over Miller's shoulder at the family. They shrank back against the wall. Behdala waved his fingers at them. "Hello, meat sacks."
Enjoying the amenities? David stood up, placing himself in front of his wife and daughter. "Stay away from us." "Feisty," Behdala noted. He looked at Miller. "The ventilation system in the South Pavilion has failed. The smoke is getting in. We need to move to the north. The manuscripts are there. They have better seals." "We're not moving the art, Bert." "Who cares about the art?" Behdala scoffed. "I'm talking about the vending machines. The break room in the North Pavilion has the good trail mix." Suddenly, a crash echoed through the complex. Massive. Glass breaking. Metal screaming. "That sounded like the main entrance," Miller said. He ran out of the office, Behdala trailing behind him with a leisurely stride. They reached the rotunda of the entrance hall. The glass doors were gone. In their place was a wall of black smoke, billowing in, swirling around the columns. And through the smoke, a deer leaped. Its fur was singed, its eyes wide with terror. It scrambled on the polished floor, hooves slipping, crashing into a ticket counter. Then a coyote, then another. They were snarling, snapping at the air, crazed with panic. "Close the inner doors," Miller shouted. He ran toward the heavy bronze doors that separated the lobby from the museum courtyard. David ran with him, adrenaline overriding his exhaustion. Together, they pushed the heavy doors. A coyote lunged. Miller kicked it in the ribs. It yelped and scrambled back. Push. They slammed the doors shut, the latch clicking just as a heavy body slammed against the other side. A mountain lion? A bear? It didn't matter. They were sealed in the courtyard now. The Getty Center was a series of pavilions around a central plaza. The fire was outside the outer walls, but the smoke and the animals were breaching the perimeter. They were trapped in the inner sanctum. Miller leaned against the bronze door, gasping for breath. The air was getting hotter. The stone floor felt warm through his boots.
"Well," Behdala's voice came from near the fountain. He was sitting on the edge of the water feature, dipping his feet in. He had taken his shoes and socks off. His feet were pale, almost translucent. "It seems we are now in a siege. The barbarians are at the gate, and the barbarians are on fire." "We need to get to the helipad," Miller said. "It's the highest point. If there's any rescue." "Rescue?" Behdala threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, braying sound that made the dog whine. "Miller, look at the sky. There is no sky. There is only ash. No pilot can fly in this. The engines would choke. We are on an island, and the ocean is made of flame." Miller looked up. Behdala was right. The sky was a swirling vortex of black and orange. Ash was falling like snow, coating the white travertine in a layer of gray filth. The beautiful, stark architecture of the Getty was being erased. "So what do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Behdala stood up. He walked over to a planter and ripped out a white rose. He sniffed it, then ate the flower whole. He chewed thoughtfully. "We survive," Behdala said, swallowing. "We wait for the fire to burn everything else down, and when it is done, we will be the kings of the cinder pile." He looked at Miller. his eyes gleaming with a terrifying intensity. But kings need sacrifices, Miller. The equation must balance. Miller gripped his gun. He realized then that the fire wasn't the most dangerous thing on this hill. The animals weren't the most dangerous thing. Behdala reached into his pocket and pulled out a remote control. "What is that?" Miller asked. "I found it in the security office," Behdala said. "It controls the fire suppression system for the galleries. Halon gas, oxygen displacement. Very effective for saving paintings. Very bad for breathing organisms." "Bert, put it down." "The fire is coming inside, Miller," Behdala said, his thumb hovering over the button. "We can't save the whole complex."
We have to choose a zone, a clean zone. I choose the West Pavilion. I like the Impressionists. There are people in there, Miller shouted. Staff, security who stayed behind. Not anymore, Behdala said. Now there are only assets and liabilities. Miller raised the gun. I will kill you, Bert. Behdala smiled, a true, genuine smile. It was the scariest thing Miller had ever seen. You can try, Miller, but I think you'll find I'm very durable. Behdala pressed the button. Sirens wailed in the distance, muffled by the stone walls. A hiss of gas could be heard from the adjacent building. Now, Behdala said, clapping his hands. Who knows how to play charades? I'm excellent at it. I once played the Black Death for 3 years and nobody guessed it. Miller stared at him. The ash fell around them, covering them in the dust of a dead city. The dog barked at the bronze doors as something massive threw itself against them from the other side. Act 4 was just beginning, and the director was insane.